Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. I have been asked a number of different times about the subject of how will tax departments know that you are doing X. So this kind of comes up fairly frequently, and I figured I would address it in this video to help you understand kind of the mechanics of what goes on and what you should be worried about. So let's dive in and discuss that. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. I hope you're doing fantastic. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with your friends, and if you would like help, please book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosman, there's a link in the description below, or send a message to our websites, offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com, or help you figure out the best legal strategy for you in terms of relocation, tax, etc., as well as help you to implement that strategy, getting residencies, citizenships, forming companies, open banking accounts, etc. So let's dive in. One of the things that I think I observed kind of fairly early on, for me, it was kind of an interesting reflection. By the time I got into this industry was after the IRS had cracked UBS. So UBS was the largest Swiss bank, and there was famously Swiss bank secrecy. The idea being that people could go and put their money there and it wouldn't get disclosed. And in 2009, the IRS, the Department of Treasury, cracked them and basically busted open Swiss bank secrecy. In 2011, there was Credit Suisse, fell, and then in 2013, basically all the Swiss banks capitulated. So that was a really interesting environment. And what ended up happening out of all the stuff that kind of happened in 2013 was anyone who was an American with an undeclared bank account had the amount of it deducted 20 to 50%, just taken away as though under the assumption it was tax evasion, whether it was or not. And what I thought about this was it was really kind of foolish for a lot of these people to do this. And the reason is that they probably could have done some legal tax planning to reduce their taxes, optimize, put some things there, especially, the laws were easier back then. And they didn't do that. And as a result, they ended up, because they were kind of being lazy, trying to say, I'm going to just kind of take a shortcut and just hide, literally doing tax evasion, putting themselves in a position where, tax evasion is a federal crime, so they could go to prison for that. They potentially lost half of the money that was in there and had all these other consequences. That seemed really, really dumb to me. And so I've always advocated people saying, hey, listen, you should understand the rules. You should, figure out how to operate legally within the framework of the rules and optimize that way, because it's just not worth the loss of sleep, the reality that you can have kind of these negative things blowing back on you, etc. This being said, for quite a while, and in a lot of parts of the world, it's been fairly easy for people to do pretty simplistic things that, frankly, are not according to the rules, which is why I talk lots about, what are the rules on this channel. But they could do that and, for probably a reasonable period of time, get away with it. Now, I think I always caution people, just because somebody is getting away with something does not in any way mean that that is legal or that it's proper, etc. I'll often hear people say, oh, my friend's doing this. And it's like, yeah, what your friend is doing is not suited to your circumstances and might not be proper for them. Just because they haven't gotten caught yet doesn't mean they won't be. And so I always kind of caution that direction. This being said, it is interesting to ask, what are the ways in which the government might find out that something is going on? And so let's talk about that. The first major way comes from banking, okay? So the big thing that's changed from, say, back when Credit Suisse was broken, etc., and the present is FATCA came in 2015, automatic exchange of information with the Common Reporting Standard, what people refer to as CRS, came in 2017. It's expanded to almost every bank that you would want to deal with in the world. And so right off the bat, if your place of residency is identified to that bank, the bank is going to report it to your country of residency, and that could then result in information being like them looking at it and saying, oh, look, what's up with this money? So that's the first thing, right? Banking is a certainly key area where governments look at what it is that's going on for a person, and they're getting better at it. Obviously, some governments are pretty disorganized. You have places like, Denmark and Netherlands and places like that that are much more on top of processing this. over time, I suspect you'll see a lot of big data applied to analyzing all these reports because it's just a huge amount of information. You can't process it manually. But there will probably be more information transparency, and along with the more information transparency, there will be more big data to analyze it. Even if you look at crypto, what you'll see is that a lot of the tax departments are hiring experts in chain analysis, and they're starting to dive down that. You've seen a lot of governments requiring on the tax forms that people identify what their wallet addresses are. Obviously, the big exchanges are required to turn over that data, etc. So that's kind of some exposure on sort of the financial layer. The next is very often you have reporting of foreign asset rules, right? So the US has FBAR, foreign bank account reporting. In a lot of cases, you have controlled foreign companies rules, so you have to report. So for example, if you're looking at something like Canada, I think it's T1134 that needs to be filed, which is like a pretty extensive information disclosure about the foreign companies, and that kind of opens up the window for, in this case, CRA, to take a look and say, well, what's going on here? You have something similar in UK. In most of the Western developed countries, you will have similar sorts of rules, okay? So controlled foreign companies rules with information disclosure associated with them, where that information, they can then take a look and say, okay, here's what's going on, and kind of assess deeper. So that's an important thing. The next thing that can happen is just plain information leaks. So obviously we saw something like the Panama Papers. Lots of investigation coming out of those big leaks. I think it's one of the advantages of dealing with a small firm as opposed to a big firm, is that big firms are more of a target for kind of investigative journalists and tax departments, etc., to do these sorts of things. We've seen a bunch of different examples of coordinated effort to go after kind of gatekeepers, and so that's something worth noting. And then often people are kind of careless in their own stuff. So this can come in two ways. I mean, I've heard some people who be like, yeah, I want to tell everybody that I have a Cayman bank account. It's like, this is the stupidest thing you could do. What are you doing? This is ridiculous. So there's some people who kind of have this ego thing associated with it. And the other is people will live beyond their means. So if you look at places like, for example, Portugal is quite big on looking at how is the person living and is their lifestyle outsized to the way that they are, which what they're declaring on their forms. You get kind of a similar thing in Denmark. I've had stories from people telling me they were pulled over driving a nice car in places like Denmark or Sweden, and comments from Danish police officers saying, we have to make sure these people aren't evading taxes, which is ridiculous, right? Kind of just nothing except for, hey, listen, you are driving a nice car and doing this, but that's the reality that you live in some of these countries. So pretty wide range of different ways that something could come up. You certainly also end up with this sort of thing if you're talking about correlating various different pieces of data, right? If money shows up in your account, where did that money come from? If money went out from your account, where did that money go to? So, you can start to pull these pieces together. Now, in reality, governments don't, at this stage, go too far down that road. It's pretty rare. Obviously, if you get audited or something, that's a little bit different. But if you're just talking about kind of day-to-day, I mean, there's just way more people for them to deal with than they have time. However, I would suggest to you that over time, they'll apply AI and automation to comb through all this stuff and look for connections. And they'll say, oh, hang on, this transfer went from here to here. Are these connected? And, they'll piece together big knowledge graphs that allow them to assess with probably a pretty high degree of accuracy. Then they can run into it some sort of an algorithm to look at the cost benefit and cross-reference different things. This stuff will come. And I think this is one of the points of why you want to operate legally and figure out what is a legal structure that you can use to optimize as much as possible. And maybe that requires putting a little bit more work. Maybe in the short run that means paying some more tax, fair enough. Because what will happen is they just have these huge data repositories, these data stores, and as they are able to activate more and more information and more analysis on top of that, even if they don't have technology to do it or something like that today, looking forward something like 5 years, how much more will they be able to do? Looking forward 10 years. And they can then start looking back and say, well, hang on a minute, what's been going on here? The thing that goes along with that is if you've been kind of trying to hide money in some offshore account somewhere and the money's accumulated there, how do you ever bring it back? If you haven't been able to bring it back, now all of a sudden you're exposed when the information does become available, much like what happened to the people in Switzerland. So general rule, as far as I'm concerned, understand the rules, understand them well, figure out how to operate within those rules while optimizing as much as possible. Make the business decisions, because there's kind of business decisions associated with that, lifestyle decisions that are going to work for kind of what's optimal in your situation, and that's going to be different for every person. And go that way, as opposed to trying to simply hide, because the hiding thing is it's a short-term game. You're going to what you'll do is you'll end up running to increasingly worse locations. So let's just talk about this quickly with CRS. I would hear people say, oh, I want to avoid CRS countries. Like, okay, well, so where do you go? Right now, maybe you can go to Georgia, right? Georgia's banking's pretty good, and you've got that. But what about when Georgia rolls over? Now where are you going to go? Maybe you run to some little island somewhere, and what about when they roll over? Then you're going to some African republic somewhere. Each time you do this, you're going farther and farther out on the risk curve, to the point where the risk of loss related to the country that you're banking in is greater than the risk of just doing things properly, etc. So I understand the desire for privacy and things like this, but that's probably not the best way to get it. And there's probably going to be a cost associated with getting privacy. Maybe you have to use some sort of a trust structure, and trusts are not inexpensive. On the other hand, trusts, if structured properly, can be a fully legal tool, and that's just your cost of insurance. And if you can't afford it, then maybe that means you should focus on building the business and making more money, and then be able to take that and have more optionality associated with you. So anyway, I hope that helps, gives you like a little bit of context. If you want help with figuring out how to optimize your situation, with figuring out what are the rules in your place, how you can work within them, please reach out to us, and I will talk to you on the next video.